representing an Islamic perspective. She is a Detroit Equity Action Lab Racial Equity Fellow and an alum of New Detroit's Multicultural Leadership Series. And finally, we have Fred Stella from the West Michigan Hindu Temple, representing a Hindu perspective. He was ordained as Petra or Outreach Minister in 2009. Fred Stella is also a weekly contributor to the Grand Rapids Press column, Ethics and Religion. If you ever want to contribute a question to the column, you can email us and we will forward it on to him. Hello, everyone. My name is Ana Saleh, and I am the General Secretary of the CIA. And I would like to thank our speakers again for joining us. Our first question for you is, why do you have festivals and what role do they play in your faith? So if one of you would like to start, go ahead, jump in.
Sure, I'll go first. Why do we have festivals? In the Christian tradition, we have festivals because we are a forgetful people. History tells us over and over again how forgetful we are. So scriptures remind us of this. The Old Testament reminds us of how forgetful the Israelites were, and also point us to our own forgetfulness. We can see this too in our modern history where we are forgetful. We forget the history that we have, and we end up making some of the same mistakes over and over and over again. And so that happens within our religious communities as well. The Christian community is no exception. And so we forget. So festivals, celebrations are ways for us to have markers to remember, to say, this is what God has done. This is what we have done. And this is why we're going to continue to celebrate. It's a marker for us. It's a reminder and a way for us to come together and then point to those things and say, remember how forgetful we were. Remember what God has done for us. Remember what God is inviting us into. So that's one of the big reasons. It's also a really wonderful way to be able to gather around food. In some ways, it's just an excuse to eat, right? And that's a really wonderful thing because we gather around something beautiful and good and nourishing, and that's what we hope our traditions and our faith community is as well. Is a beautiful and nourishing community where we get to hold each other up and celebrate each other, and then also around the table we'll say things like, remember when Mark did this, or remember when Matt
Sorry for this brief interruption. We're trying to resolve it as quickly as we can. Thank you for your patience.
how do you think we should rejoice this week as a celebration?
Take time off to give yourself little breaks, and go do something fun. If the weather's nice enough, go get some ice cream, or go for a walk around Reed's Lake. Give yourself like little mini pauses or vacations. You can even find like little timers and stuff like that to take mini breaks from your homework. I find a Chrome extension or something like that that gives you little breaks like that, so that you're not constantly looking at a computer screen, because that's a temptation to just like finish your homework, go on Netflix and just keep watching screens. It's bad for your eyes, bad for your overall health. Find ways to be able to get up and give yourself some mini breaks.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. We're back up and running now. Rabbi Schadick, I'm going to repeat the question for you one more time. Why do you have festivals, and what role do they play in your faith?
So thanks for having me with you. I guess I'm going to delay here. I would suggest to you that the festivals are a reminder of historical events, and we celebrate them today not simply to remember those, but to glean, to garner a certain way of life by them and by the commandments that are part of these festivals. For example, in only a couple of days, we will be celebrating one of the most widely observed Jewish festivals of the entire year, and that is our festival, our holiday of Passover. And the holiday is just filled with opportunities to remember not only our history, but our obligations to the world in which we live in today. So important for us is this foundation story of our tradition, that we make alterations to our life for a whole week to put ourselves in the mindset of those that came before us, to put ourselves in the position to remember what it might have been to live in slavery. And so we remember our ancestors, but also a festival like Passover pushes us to think about how the world around us is still not filled with freedom for all people. One of the reasons that Passover, I think, has always been such an important festival in the life of the Jewish community is because of the lessons it teaches us today and yesterday, and will always teach us about the world that we live in today and the world that we might like to live in should we find ourselves in a situation for us. Passover is significant because every year we gather in our homes to observe this, and it's an opportunity for us to teach our children about the history of the holiday, but also to pose questions to help them understand that what their ancestors went through and the challenges they faced still pose questions for themselves today. And the opportunity we have at Passover is an annual recognition of the challenges we face as a people and as a country and as a world, really, that no human being should be forced to live in a way that our ancestors lived. And so Passover certainly is a widely observed holiday, and it reminds us of our obligations. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Awesome, thank you so much. Petra, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the Calvin Interfaith Alliance for inviting me. And it's great to be with great speakers here. And so today I'm going to speak about the tradition of Ramadan or fasting in Ramadan, which doesn't always fall in the spring. And I know we're focused on spring holidays, but like our Jewish brothers and sisters, we follow a lunar calendar. So it moves around. But the spirit and the purpose still the same, obviously. And that's the month where Muslims around the world and Muslim Americans in the US are fasting during that time period. They're fasting from sunrise to sunset. And the purpose of that, obviously there's a lot of personal purposes, but the overall is it's a time of reset. I like what our previous speaker said. It's a time of reset. You know, you're pausing for a whole month, trying to think of you know, your relationship to your faith, the relationship of your faith to their community, reprioritizing things in your life. You see communities and individuals and families really just changing everything about their own schedule and structure to focus on what should matter every other day, but we know how hectic life is. So it's a time to reset. It's a time to develop that deeper relationship with God and the Creator. It's a month where the Holy Quran was revealed, and as many of you know, this is the guiding text for Muslims around the world. So people are developing deeper relationship with their guide, their guidebook, their source for where they receive their inspiration. And it's a time to think about people and communities that, think about your privileges and the things that you have and what you could contribute to people around you. So it's time of renewal, time of reconnecting deeper connections, and time to build community and family.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Our second question for our speakers. What is your favorite faith-based festival, and how has that pandemic affected the celebration? You can go in the same order as well.
Okay. My favorite festival is Easter. This is well, and it's followed closely by Christmas. It's hard for me to choose, but if we have to choose a springtime one, Easter, that's our big Christian celebration. And so Easter has been, well, last year at this time, everything was just getting shut down, and we had to adjust our Easter plans. So we couldn't gather for the sunrise service or do other kinds of worship together in the same way. So we had to get creative, and a lot of our churches started to figure out how to use Zoom and how to use YouTube and how to use other kinds of streaming services. So it was a little bit of an adjustment last year. This year, we're much better at Zoom and YouTube kinds of things. So we're going to continue to do that. But our church has adapted to this pandemic season in doing other kinds of festival-like things. For Ash Wednesday, to start this season of Lent. In mid-February, they had a drive-through. We had a drive-through imposition of ashes on the forehead, so people could drive through in their cars and have the ashes imposed on their forehead. So we've adapted to we're going to use our parking lot in a unique way. We're going to use whatever spaces we have or can use, or collaborate with other area churches to be able to offer something. And it's less tied to a specific festival. But we're adjusting and adapting, trying to make our community still meaningful. So we have Zoom coffee hour after our worship services on Sunday. And that's been a really wonderful way to connect with people that we might not always connect with. So we're going to continue to do that in our post-Easter celebrations as well. But that's my favorite holiday, and the ways that our faith community has adapted.
So for you,
if I may, first of all, as far as Hindu holidays are concerned, Diwali is a wonderful holiday, and it is the biggest holiday on the calendar, celebrated every movement, sect, denomination of Hinduism celebrates Diwali. It normally takes place in November. It is considered the festival of lights. There are a few different versions of just exactly what is celebrated during Diwali. But the bottom line is, whatever story you focus on, it has to include the very important theme of the eternal victory of light over darkness. That's the bottom line. And it has all of the trappings of any grand festival, with, again, copious amounts of foods, a great deal of socializing. Here in Grand Rapids, we have our temple Diwali celebration, which is much more religious, but we also have a more social celebration of Diwali as well. I want to bring up the festival of Holi, which is spelled Holi when it's transliterated from the Sanskrit. That is I'm bringing it up because it is a spring or pre-spring festival. It's the festival of colors. You may have seen or read about it, where we get together in large groups and we completely attack one another with colored powders and colored water. It's just very, very fun. We often will meet in a park and just have at it, just cover people with colored powders, a variety of colored powders. It's a lot of fun. And again, when you think of spring, you think of rebirth, you think of the colors of spring. So it's a perfect opportunity to do this. But my favorite, okay, those are my favorite Hindu holidays. My favorite overall holiday is Christmas. Now, why is that? Well, very quickly, Jesus does not figure into Hinduism officially. However, because Hinduism is much older than Christianity, but Christianity was introduced into Hindu culture about 500 years ago or so. And especially in the 19th century, when the British colonized India, there was a great deal of interfaith dialogue. It wasn't always civil because the missionaries would sometimes be very ham-handed. But at the same time, people learned about Jesus and they sort of welcomed him into the fold, if you will, without giving up. Some people converted, of course, but other people just simply welcomed Jesus in the fold. So I would say that I venerate the Jesus of Mahatma Gandhi, who was very inspired by the Gospels in his nonviolent movement, but he never became a Christian. So many Hindus, unofficially, of course, acknowledge Jesus as, say, another Buddha, an enlightened one, one who had a great message, but not a Messiah, because there's no way that a Messiah would fit into Hindu theology. Now, I was raised an Italian-American Roman Catholic, and so much of what I appreciate about a holiday is the memories of coming back from going back to childhood and young adulthood, et cetera. And I can't just dismiss those and say they don't mean anything. But I want to be very clear that it's not just a social holiday for me, that I do honor the work and the message of Jesus. And my particular spiritual community, actually, we choose one day in Advent where we have an 8-hour meditation service in honor of Jesus and his message. So while Christmas Day is certainly very social, prior to that, during Advent, we are allowed, if you will, I don't like that phrase, but we certainly can, if inspired, partake of the Christmas spirit.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, Rabbi Schadick, you can go ahead and do this one.
Thanks. So for me, one of my, if not my most favorite Jewish holidays takes place in the fall. Christians might know this as the Feast of Tabernacles. In my tradition, in my community, we know it as the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is a holiday in which we give thanks for the blessings of a harvest. It's almost like a Thanksgiving, like an American Thanksgiving, but our holiday is biblically mandated, and we celebrate for not 1, 2, 3, or 4 days, but for 7 days. And what we do is, on Sukkot, as a way to give thanks for our blessings, we leave the comfort of our own homes and we spend time outside. So Sukkot happens sometime usually between the 3rd or 4th week of September through middle of October. And here in West Michigan, those are among some of the most beautiful weeks of the year. So outside, we spend time in a small hut known as a sukkah. We build this hut called a sukkah on Sukkot, again known by many in the Christian world as the Feast of Tabernacles. We do so to remind ourselves of a couple of things. One of the things is that in our history, the Israelites traveled in the desert for 40 years and they lived in temporary dwelling places. So we build these to remind ourselves of the temporary nature of life, but also during the times of harvest, folks would camp out in the fields as they were harvesting their crops. So we build these to remind ourselves of the temporary dwellings that folks lived in for those 40 years, but also the places they lived as they harvested. Sukkot is a holiday of celebration, of joy, of festivity. We give thanks, in essence, for the blessings of a season, a growing season, either ending or soon to end. And what makes it so much fun is that for Jews, we're outside and we entertain people in our sukkahs. We invite friends over, we eat meals in it. In my backyard, I invite friends, my neighbors, they come and they eat in my backyard, in my sukkah. The sukkah has a roof of natural elements, and that is in place so you can see the stars at night. We light up our sukkahs with what we call sukkah lights. Some people call them Christmas lights. We call them sukkah lights. We light up our sukkah and we entertain people. And we're reminded of the story that Abraham welcomed guests into his tent as well during Sukkot, or we think of them as we celebrate Sukkot. So it's a great holiday of food and friends and guests. We're outside in some of the most beautiful weeks of the year. And so for me, this is my favorite holiday. And I will say that we've had to accommodate COVID-19 in ways you've already heard, that we've had to stream services and have Zoom classes and Zoom socials. And so this is the very first year, this past fall, where I could not invite people except for my family into my sukkah. So I had to improvise. I sent my entire membership a daily greeting and thoughts from my sukkah via video. So every day I walk them around my sukkah and I wish them a happy Sukkot, a happy holiday, and I shared with them, some wisdom to chew on. It was sort of like a virtual welcoming in my sukkah on Sukkot. And I'm hoping that this fall, this Sukkot, I can actually have people in my sukkah again.
Thank you so much. I hope so too, for all religions and being able to spend time with other people other than their family. Petra, go ahead.
Thank you. So it's really hard to choose which holiday is your favorite, because obviously I love all holidays, especially if they involve gift and food and money and, So in Islam, and for Muslim Americans, obviously Ramadan, I spoke about that a little bit, and just like everyone else, we had to adjust and do virtual iftars, that's the breaking of the fast, virtual prayers, virtual everything. And I was really impressed by how, the community adjusted, not only adjusted, but actually made it a little bit more accessible for people who normally wouldn't be able to participate in these festivities. But so after Ramadan, there is an actual holiday, a celebration of completing the fast. That's called Eid al-Fitr. celebration of breaking your fast. And then 2 months after that, thinking about it now, this actually I will consider that my favorite holiday because of the significant meaning it have. It's called Eid al-Adha. So, meaning the feast of the sacrifice. And because of the work I do and who I am, and really believe in, and because even our research show a lot of people assume that Islam is misogynistic, and that Muslims are misogynistic. The fact that one of our major holidays was not only inspired by a woman, but most of the rituals in that holiday follow a ritual that a woman set. To me is really powerful. So Eid al-Adha, or the Feast of the Sacrifice, follows the story of our mother Hajar, who's the wife of Prophet Abraham. Prophet Abraham was just mentioned here earlier. So that's, we have that story in our tradition too. And to spare you the details, the version that we have in the holiday follows when Prophet Abraham took his wife Hajar to the desert with her son Ishmael, and she was left there. And she, during her time there, trying to find food, trying to find water, so she's pacing the desert and walking between the two mountains. End up finding a well, or God created a well for her to end up drinking from it and save her child. It was, for most of my life as a Muslim, I didn't know that the rituals we follow for Eid al-Adha actually follow the traditions or the rituals that Ummuna Hajar, or Mother Hajar, was doing during that time. And so that speaks a little bit to the knowledge that we need to kind of revive within the Muslim community. But when I learned, it's like, okay, we spend a lot of time talking about feminism and women empowerment and all of that, and here's a whole holiday that's literally dedicated to that story. So in Eid al-Adha, when Muslims who are able physically, financially, and spiritually are required to make that journey to Mecca, they end up going there. And the significance is, they're following the same rituals that Ummuna Hajar was following during that time, but there's a lot of other meanings that embody the spirit of Islam in that holiday. So one, following the rituals of the women set. Two, when you get there, regardless of who you are, your socioeconomic status, your position, your background, you're required to dress the same, you follow the same rituals, you have the same things that you're doing with other people, regardless of their race, ethnic background, language they speak. Doesn't matter who they are. They're all dressed in white. They, men shave their head. They're following the exact same things. And to me, that embodies the spirit, again, in Islam, where equality is the religion. You're not better than anyone because of your language or your skin color or anything. And it's really meaningful, especially considering the time we're living in the conversation we're having around the world, but especially in this country, and especially for American Muslims. And then the last piece of it, or two more pieces, is one, once you're done completing the rituals of the pilgrimage, which fall around Eid al-Adha, if you follow them properly and you made the proper intention and you prepared correctly for it, then you're kind of a born again Muslim. I'm borrowing that terminology from Christianity because we don't have that, but in theory, your sins and bad deeds prior to Hajj are wiped out, and you have a new chance to start over and correct and relive or re-envision your life the way you want to live it in accordance with your tradition. And then finally, for those who are not able to join in Hajj because it's financially costly, or they have debt, or physically they're not able to, or whatever, and also there are limitations to making, visa limitations and so forth for people to actually enter Saudi and make that pilgrimage. it doesn't mean that whole experience is lost on you. Okay, so that's another piece about the faith that's really special for me, is that Islam is accessible, and accessible no matter where you are. So if you're not able to make that journey, you could follow similar rituals at home. There are things that you could do at home, you know, and celebrate with your brothers and sisters who are making the pilgrimage, and still get the meaning and learn about the experience, and still benefit from that time, that holy time for Muslims. So you know, I really appreciate that holiday, and as I get older, I appreciate it more. And as I learn more about how American Muslims and Muslims around the world are viewed, especially in connection to women, I grow to appreciate that holiday a little bit more.
Thank you so much. I definitely agree. My uncle and my two aunts went to Hajj 2 years ago, so the year before COVID, and they said it was a life-changing experience. So I totally agree with you. Our third question is, how has your community of faith responded to this crisis of COVID overall?
Like I said, how has our community responded to COVID? Yeah. We responded well, we wanted to make sure that we're protecting our community. So from the very beginning, we said we're not going to do in-person gatherings because we're trying to protect the people who are most vulnerable. So we're not going to gather even with masks, because science is telling us that even singing with a mask on, there's a lot of aerosolized particles, all that kind of stuff. So we're trying to pay attention to good science. And so we haven't been meeting in person at all, unless we're doing some of those like drive-through kinds of parking lot activities or celebrations. But our community is also, we're still gathering, but it's just a YouTube streaming of the worship service, and then a Zoom gathering afterwards for our quote unquote coffee time. And we're trying to still be good community. Our small group at our church, so we have a group of a few people that's just kind of organically came together, and we've been paying attention to each other. The families involved in our small group all have young children, and we've been able to like drop off coloring books and treats and snacks and all those kinds of things that kind of surprise and delight you with, oh, this just showed up on my step. So we're trying to still be good community, especially in those smaller, more intimate settings where we've got a lot of pull with a few people. And I don't know everyone in our worshiping community. I don't know. I can probably recognize everyone, but I don't know them the way that I know our small group. So we've been trying to take care of each other by doing those kind of small things. And then when it's possible, when the weather allows, West Michigan is sometimes not very kind in the weather that we have, but when the weather allows, we'll try to gather in a safe way with masks and distance at the park. And this has been a diligent exercise in trying to keep our kids distanced from each other as well. They're just used to like running up to each other and hugging each other. But we have to remind them that we're taking care of each other by not sharing the sickness. So we're going to stay distanced from each other, those kinds of things. But our community is taking this seriously, and the leaders in our church have told us not to anticipate getting back together probably until August. So we're kind of bracing ourselves for that kind of reality moving forward. But we're still trying to be good community and come up with clever and creative ways to celebrate together in ways that still mean life and light for us. So, yeah.
So I'm a member of two communities. I'll talk about both of them briefly. As mentioned in my introduction, I am the Pracharek or Outreach Minister for the West Michigan Hindu Temple. Hindu temples tend to be completely non-denominational. Now, that's not universally true, but if you are driving in any of the major cities and you see a Hindu temple, chances are it's an entity unto itself. So we are that, right? We are not connected to any other organization just the West Michigan Hindu Temple Board of Directors, etc. And we're located in Cascade. Then I'm also a member of an organization in English. It's called Self-Realization Fellowship. In Sanskrit, because it began in India, as it wouldn't surprise you. It's called the Yogoda Satsanga Society. That's much more contemplative. It's really focused much more on meditation. So locally, at the Grand Rapids Hindu Temple, the temple has been open throughout most of this pandemic. However, ceremonies have been very, very few and far between. Most people, when they want to go to the temple, they go there to pray and meditate. And as long as they're masked and they're socially distant, and in any given moment, there might be 10 people in the whole temple, and it's fairly large. So there's no real concern, but there is significant protocol, as I say, with the masking, with the distancing, and people are able to sit far apart from one another and do their spiritual practice. Then in the meditation chapter that we have for Self-Realization Fellowship, again, that's an international organization, and we have online activities daily, multiple times during the day, to accommodate people in multiple time zones, because we're virtually everywhere. And so, for instance, I could probably jump online right now, and there could be a meditation going on led by a monk. There could be a scripture study led by a monk or a nun or a layperson. There could be some yoga exercises going on, but it's constant, day after day after day. So you do have that online support there. And our local chapter, we have met, for instance, we just met recently, where we agreed it would be a very small group, we would be distanced, but every person at that meditation had been vaccinated, and we were all very comfortable with that. So there will probably be more and more of very small groups meeting to meditate together, with that proviso that everyone be vaccinated.
Awesome. Now I'm going to give it to our online speakers. Go ahead.
So I think for us, we've tried to be as creative as possible to stay connected with our members. Just yesterday, I sent out 40 packages to our college students who are in Michigan, across the country, a Passover package. We've sent packages to our entire membership for Hanukkah, for Rosh Hashanah. We're trying to stay connected with them as best we can, as well through virtual services, virtual classes, virtual study. Until the past year, I'd never had a virtual Torah class before.
Rabbi Schadick, you're muted.
No, Rabbi Schadick is muted.
All right, I think I'm unstuck now. I was stuck. I'll reverse what I was saying. I don't know if you heard anything at all, but my point was we're trying to stay connected with our members. Lots of virtual opportunities. We're sending them things to stay connected. It's kind of a mixed blessing, though. Though we've had virtual services, it's been lovely for some of our most senior members who maybe can't get out for whatever reason, they don't drive or they don't drive at night. It's been a blessing for them. And they've appreciated the fact that we've been doing these things virtually. But I think people realize that to be here in person, to be able to hug each other and to shake each other's hands and to be with each other in proximity is a good thing. So, we've done all we can. We think we've had parking lot things as well. But in the end, we realize how important it is to be together. And I think at the end of this, we're going to really, truly appreciate each other in ways that heretofore we probably wouldn't have appreciated. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Petra.
Yeah, so here in the Metro Detroit region, the Muslim community have definitely done a mix of things. So obviously when the state shut down or recommended that places of worship close, the mosques around here definitely closed for a period of time. People are praying from home. And like the rabbi mentioned, I think it really made people aware of the blessing of community and being together and seeing each other on a regular basis. But in Islam, it's very, very important to take, safety of life very seriously and to follow science recommendations. As soon as the recommendations from the CDC came out, imam councils and Muslim scholars around the country said, this is what you need to follow. This is what needs to take place for the safety of everyone. And as recommendations relaxed a little bit, you'll see mosques adjusting accordingly. So you'll see some prayers are back in the masjid or back in the mosque, obviously with mosque requirement, taking people's temperatures, social distancing, the whole rule. Elders are not encouraged to go, especially if they have pre-existing conditions. So we're trying to keep the health and safety of the community in mind when creating this, when following worship requirements. At the same time, the community have been very, very creative. The blessing of being American Muslim is we're part of a very young community. About a third of our community is between the ages of 18 and 24. So you could imagine Zoom was not an issue for a lot of people, and so is Facebook and YouTube and every other social media platform that I'm not even aware of myself. So we found, interestingly enough, more accessibility. Ramadan services became virtual. Eid celebration moved virtual, but also people became very creative and have a drive-through celebration. So instead of having the whole congregation together in the mosque to, like normally we would, they just encourage people, decorate your car just like you would for graduation or for a wedding or for whatever. And let's just have a drive-through for the community and pass out gifts and candy and sweets for keep the spirit and keep the spirit of celebrating and having a joyous moment alive in the community, and especially for the kids who really struggled with just being indoor and not having a way to celebrate the holidays, or people organized holiday celebrations in the park. Obviously, social distance requirements were followed. So they had, just different activities that were planned, and people are able to be together, but follow safety measures. And then the last thing is with the accessibility part is not only are mosques adjusting and you could follow the mosque that you normally attend, you could follow their online programming, but now you could actually listen to your favorite imam or sheikh or Islamic leader, men or women from anywhere around the country. So it created this extra level of accessibility for people, especially for example, who families with young children who might not be able to attend regular service. So now they could just enjoy it from the comfort of their home. or people who are working full time, or people who just have busy schedules who weren't able to dedicate the time they wanted to attend prayer regularly at the masjid, now are able to kind of attend it in their own home and listen to people they really value their input. So that's some of the things. And then the last part is those places of worship have turned into community hubs in terms of distributing food and care packages, not only for the Muslim community, but for the larger community. So you will see a lot of school lunches are being passed out from those places. Community food distributions are being passed out from those places. And now many of them are turning into vaccination centers. So not only, taking the masjid to the community, into people's homes, but turning it into a community hub that will serve the Muslims who are attending the service there, but everyone else that lives around them. So I guess that's the blessing that have come out of the situation.
Thank you so much. For the faith communities in a whole, I applaud their leaders for coming together and bringing our community in like a shift in a way and being so creative, just like how Petra said. And I applaud them for that, for their leadership. Our final question for our speakers is, how has your faith given you hope or support during this time?
Yeah, my faith is something that guides me in all of my life. And it's something that helps me not have fear amidst the face of facing death, possible death, right? COVID is something that can end up taking your life, and that's a serious thing. And not for me to be able to just say, faith over fear, and so that I'm not going to wear a mask. That's not what this is about. But I have a faith in Jesus, that his death and resurrection means that there's something different about our world. That this is not the way it will always be. There will not always be COVID. There will not always be cancer. There will not always be sickness and death. So that hope animates me and helps me feel like, that I don't have to be afraid of death. So I'm not afraid. I don't live in fear. But my Christian faith also animates me to do something to protect other people. So I wear a mask, and I make sure that I'm socially distanced. And our faith community, our church, is saying that this is important as well. Wear a mask, stay distanced. We're not going to gather in person because we're taking this very seriously. And I know there are some people within this Christian tradition that will say, well, faith over fear means I don't have to wear a mask, and I'm not going to be, I don't know, there's all kinds of confluence of ideas and Christian nationalism and other kinds of things that get in the way. But personally, I'm really glad for the way that my faith community has responded and saying, well, let's make sure we take this really seriously and care. Sorry to the other presenters who might not be able to hear this. Because I want to make sure that I'm protecting other people, and that's a big part of how my faith is lived out in the midst of this pandemic. That's where I'll leave it.
If I could, I'd like to replace the word faith with practice. Practice is a very important word in Hinduism. It's not so much what you believe as what you do in your spiritual life. And having had a practice of meditation for over 3 decades now, a consistent practice, I believe that I now am able to maintain a level of contentment in adverse situations. Other than when I'm like trying to fix plumbing or a light fixture, okay? That I have not been able to surmount. I will have achieved enlightenment when I can do that without raising my blood pressure. When something is beyond my capability of changing, it has become easier to accept. Also, because of the restrictions, because of the lockdowns, it has given me a more of an opportunity for spiritual practice, for meditation, for scripture study, for chanting, and all of the various things that I might do during the day. And certainly on a macro level, having that community, as I say, being able to tune in online to the scripture classes, to the lectures, to whatnot, is consistently instilled in me a joy, an appreciation. Yes, of course, I do want to get back to normal life, but at the same time, I've learned to appreciate the circumstances as best I can, to be content just living with my wife, for instance, the holidays, to actually just have the Christmas be my wife and myself, as opposed to my big Italian family in Detroit, which I love very dearly. But this Christmas was just wonderful. This New Year was just wonderful without doing anything spectacular. So that is what I have acquired, I hope, during this time.
Awesome. Our online speaker, go ahead.
Isn't it paradoxical when we lived in a time before COVID and we were here and available all the time, people would come or they wouldn't come. Some didn't feel the need to come. Now, when people are really searching for a sense of hope and courage in the face of all this, we've been unable to be here in the way we've traditionally been here. And so they have sought us out, which is, I think, a remarkable thing. It's a reminder to people who sometimes haven't thought that they need religious life in their own lives, that they do, in fact, need religious life in their days, because not every day is going to be all we might want it to be. And we need a community of faith to help us through the challenging moments, to be there with us and for us as we try to figure out the uncertainties of the future. Make no mistake about it, we are living in a very uncertain time. But I think that, at least in my community, people have gone out of their way to seek out a sense of support and strength and comfort in ways that beforehand maybe they hadn't done. And again, I think from this day forward, they're going to appreciate the things that maybe they took for granted in terms of coming to worship. Now they know that it really, or many know it really is a benefit to their life. It helps guide them through the challenging times. It's there for them all the time. And so I find it very, very promising that when COVID-19 finally is not part of our lives in the same way, many people will have learned that there is some real value to seeking out the wisdom that can guide them in troubling, challenging moments of their lives. For me, it's a new reminder that the wisdom of my faith is there for me in both good and bad times. And I've had the opportunity, because I've been at home for much of the year, to really seek that out in ways that maybe if I was in my office seeing people, I wouldn't have had the chance. So in the end, I think that people understand anew the benefit of of a faith community. And I'm hoping that they don't forget that.
So for me, what Islam provided during this time is a sense of grounding and humbling. And at the same time, kind of a sense of privilege as a faith community, because it was one of the few times where I saw my faith is not in conflict with what people are supposed to follow. So what I mean by that is, growing up and just learning about Islam, we've always been told, it's a faith for all places, all times. And I didn't really fully understand what that meant, except, everyone think their faith is special, including me. I thought my faith is very special, so it was a thing to say about it. But I saw that in play during this time. So when COVID hit, when we started learning about it in early March of last year, I had a business trip that I was gonna go on to California. No, it wasn't California. It was Washington State, and that's where the first cases, or some of the first cases, were being reported. I literally was gonna fly to that same area. And I was struggling because there were no state recommendations. There were no federal recommendations. Most workplaces were still operating. But I just did not feel easy about it. And so I was asking my colleague, and she shared a lecture with me, obviously an Islamic lecture, where it says from the Prophet time, where in accordance to the Prophet, he was saying, if a plague hits an area, don't enter it or don't leave it. And that was it. That was all I needed at that time. To me, that was a wisdom that was 1,400 years old, and it fit perfectly to the time period that we lived in. And so that made sense, and the recommendations, CDC recommendations followed. And it continued to play for the last year and until now. It was reassuring for the first time to see my community in a very positive light, for someone who for the last 20 years, all I've heard and all I've seen was just the negativity of, or the way people talk about Islam negatively. And for the first time, I'm able to kind of live through and see my faith community being, at the front line of, in the medical field, at the front line in terms of responding to what science is telling us. I don't have that conflict. I don't have that conflict. And so I don't want to say it felt easy, but it did feel easy. It made sense. Imams and religious leaders saying, yep, this is, the doctor said do this. This is what we need to do. So there was no contradiction. There was no conflict for me, at least. And at the same time, it felt humbling and grounding because, like the rabbi mentioned, it's a time of uncertainty. There was just so much. There's death. There's a lot of death around us. And it was a good reminder to reflect on what the faith is telling us about this life is not lasting. We're here temporary, we're visitors, we need to make the best of it and remember that we sometimes have to let go of loved ones. It's not easy to let go of a family member or a relative or a community member that you love dearly, but you're not going to be here either tomorrow. So how do you treat people when they're around you, and what way you need to dignify them when they leave? So just a good reminder and a humbling experience. And then the last piece is, grounding, and just to try to find the meaning in things that are happening. It's really hard for our minds, as great as they are, to really make sense of all of this. It's a lot to take in, the regular stress of life, and then just to see pandemic and just so much distress in families and communities. How do you get a sense of hope? How do you get a sense to wake up tomorrow? How do you comfort a parent who just lost a child, or one of their sons or daughters? How do you comfort how do you comfort yourself? How do you make sense of all of this? And so I think that's what Islam was, what allowed me to do during this time, to really humble myself, humble my way of thinking, ground myself, and at the same time be able to, for one of the few times, celebrate the fact that my faith allows for answers and directions during really, really, really difficult times, not just for individuals and families, but literally for the whole world.
I would like to take a chance and say thank you to our speakers for their responses and give them a round of applause.
Hello, I'm Austin. I am the treasurer for CIA, and right now we'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. If you are online, Carson will read out your questions. If you are in person, you can either speak them out loud, and I will say them so that our guests online can hear them. Or you can email us at cia@calvin.edu if you'd prefer to do this more anonymously. Any questions? Ben?
I was just wondering if you guys have a favorite like meal or food that's associated with the holiday. Maybe talk about that.
So do you have a favorite meal or food that you associate with your favorite holidays?
I'll answer. A wonderful Italian tradition is called Vigilia, which is on Christmas Eve, and it is that evening that you serve a 7-course seafood feast. And it is quite remarkable. I grew up with that and I maintain that. And it certainly above and beyond what you put in your mouth is also who's also putting that in their mouths around the table. And growing up, I keep mentioning my family because I grew up in a fairly tight-knit family, extended family, not just my nuclear family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And I continue to do that, not just because it really does taste good, it does, but I do that as in memorial of so many of those people who are no longer on this plane. It is part of what I do. So that is the first thing that comes to mind. Now, very quickly, as far as the Hindu holidays go, whatever anybody is serving is fine with me. I love Indian food, and wherever I go, I don't cook Indian. My wife is just learning to cook Indian. She is also a non-Indian Hindu. So she's just learning, but fortunately we have a great network of friends. And I cannot at this moment say, oh, this holiday and this particular food. It's all good.
I'll offer my answer quickly before my colleagues give their answers. But I'm a sucker for fresh bread, like any meal with fresh bread. And some of you might know this about me, that I in the program that I lead here, I teach people how to make bread. And so bread is something that's very important to me, and important for this, for the Eucharist, for the celebration of the Lord's Supper at the table. It's a very ordinary thing, but there's something magical about fresh bread. The simple, straightforward, and oh man, my mouth is literally watering. I'm gonna get to my basket pretty soon. Because I'm thinking about it now, and I'm going to need to go have some fresh bread. But fresh bread, any meal where we can enjoy fresh bread, that's a good meal for me.
So for me, having a long history of Jewish roots, brisket is in my DNA, and the love of it, from corned beef brisket at a deli to brisket which I'll be making for Passover this coming Saturday evening. Jews eat a lot of it. Jews eat brisket at Hanukkah, brisket on Rosh Hashanah, brisket on Passover, and there's something about it. Before it became trendy, the past 10 years or so, brisket was cheap. They would almost give it away. And Jews historically, coming from Eastern Europe, didn't have much money, so they bought or they had a cheap cut of meat, and they would cook it low and slow for a long time, or they'd pickle it, or they'd corned beef it. And that tradition continues in America. And now it's trendy. Now it's expensive. You got to buy a brisket. It is not inexpensive at all, but we continue to eat it. It's sort of, everyone has their own recipe. Jews have a love for sweet and sour food. So I cook in my house, and we have every occasion. It's a sweet and sour brisket with like a raisin and vinegar sauce. It's really, we're used to it. We love it. So absolutely, unequivocally for me, it is the humble brisket that has been elevated to great heights in these days now of, well, it's trendy.
So now I'm really, really hungry. And any meal that does not have some kind of bread or potato is just should not be called a meal, in my opinion. So that's my right. So that's my personal opinion. In terms of like religiously significant food, when I talked about Ramadan, we talked about fasting. So imagine fasting all day. Here it's like 12 to 16 hours sometimes from sunrise to sunset. No food, no drink. So we are encouraged by the Prophet to break our fast with date. The food, they're really small and sweet, and water. And so that's significant, because again, it's simple food, but scientifically it really stabilizes your stomach. If you're fasting for that long, you don't want to break your fast with like something heavy or hearty or sour or whatever, because you could make a lot of damage after that many hours of fasting. So breaking your fast with dates is stabilize it for you. For me personally, the traditional food, I don't know if I have any significant religiously. I don't think it does, but culturally in Ramadan, we break our fast after we do it with date and water, something called samosa. It's something you find in a lot of cultures, sambusa. There's so many ways to spell it and say it, but it's amazing. It's like, if you have not had sambusa, you're missing out in your life. You really need to go to your Indian, Middle Eastern, Indian or Middle Eastern store, get you some. But it's some kind of bread, very light, and you stuff it with whatever you want, really. Like, you could be creative. You could stuff it with meat and vegetables. You could stuff it with potatoes. You could stuff it with vegetables by themselves. You could cheese, whatever's on your mind. You could be as creative as you want, and then you fry it.
Did you stuff it with brisket?
Whatever you want, there are really no rules. I'm sure there are some cultural limits, but if we like food, you don't care about that. And then you fry it, and you eat those amazing and crispy, like triangular things with some kind of sauce or by themselves, and that's all you need in life. I'm too hungry, so don't get me started on food.
Any other questions in the audience? Yes, up there.
Is there anything that when COVID restrictions loosen up and when enough people get vaccinated and things get under control, will there be anything that you'll miss? Like, will it be like, man, I don't have to worry about wearing a nice pair of pants that everybody's gonna see me from here on up on Zoom? Anything like that you'll miss?
Okay, so just quickly to repeat that, when COVID restrictions and vaccinations kind of calm down, is there going to be anything you missed about the COVID era and Zoom worship and celebrations, such as the example given in the question, are you gonna miss not needing to wear nice pairs of pants, because they're only gonna see you kind of, shoulders up on the Zoom call?
This is a good question. I'm gonna delete Zoom real hard when this is over. But I think your point is valid, like, what kinds of things have you grown to appreciate with all of this? And so we've actually been talking in our church, or at least a few of us have been talking about how we should probably invite people to just like show up with their ceramic coffee mugs in their pajamas for the first few weeks, just to like kind of welcome people back in slowly. And yeah, maybe we should just make it as easy as possible to rejoin these community gatherings. You don't have to, you can just wear your pajamas, and that's totally fine. But I do think that there is something really wonderful about being able to appreciate I have 2 small kids at home, so there's like a little bit of chaos that happens in the midst of when we stream our YouTube worship service. There's a little bit of chaos, and I've kind of grown to appreciate that. And there's less of that chaos. It's a little bit more like keep kids entertained with like crayons and things like that, where they go and worship in a different part of the church building for a little bit. I've kind of grown to appreciate a little bit of the chaos, and so I might actually miss that just a little bit. Yeah, not the constant asking for snacks though. Yeah, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. They are always asking for snacks. Yeah.
I would say that the past year, since socializing hasn't been really a thing other than Zoom, and I've not been a great fan. I've been a medium fan of socializing on Zoom, where you make a date to being with other people on Zoom, and all of that. I think that for the most part, I see the conversations a little bit stilted. You just don't have the body language and all of that. I do it, but I'm not a major fan. I really would look forward to meeting my friends in person. But what this has meant is that my social life has been almost exclusively with my wife, and that has been a wonderful thing. My wife and I have very independent lives. And so this is kind of forced us to say, no, you're not going here, you're not going there, you stay here. And it really has been delightful. And I know that when we are moving towards normalcy, that part of that is going to go away because there will be other people in our lives. And so, yeah, that is something that and also in the very, very, in the thick of it, let's say a year ago, 10 months ago, when things were just really, really serious, I think that was a time when I really started to increase my study time, my meditation time, and I enjoyed that. I will still, of course, continue to do that, but I think it was a little bit more intense back then.
So I have 2 quick answers. One, I'm sitting here and I get a note from the president of our temple saying, are you available tonight at 6? So I said, sure. Before COVID, that would have meant I'd be in the building for a meeting at 6. But now I can go home for dinner and be in a meeting and save time because I'm not in my car going back and forth, and be home with my family. So I'm hoping for meetings like that are probably a half hour to 45 minutes, we're going to continue. And I'm going to miss those if in fact we go to have every meeting back in person. What I'm also going to miss is I have siblings and my mom who live in states across the country. And it's been very nice. Like, for example, during the 8 nights of Hanukkah, we were able to gather together every night and light candles and sing and share stories. In a typical year, I would have been in this building on some of those nights, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I'm certain that when COVID restrictions are lifted, I'll have those other commitments and I won't be able to be with my family as much. And certainly for other occasions too, because we don't live nearby and other holidays, we would just make a phone call, but we've been able to, Zoom and see each other. It's been very, very nice. I'm going to miss some of that when life's other commitments go back to a more normal situation.
Yes, I'm echoing what my colleagues here have mentioned. I definitely will miss just being comfortable in the clothing that I'm wearing as a visibly Muslim woman who chooses to cover. It could get a lot of layering, and pajamas are very comfortable at home. All I have to worry about is hearing up, and the rest I don't have to worry about that when I'm at home, and I could meet with as many people as possible. Also having my elderly parents with me, have been able to see them more, spend time with them more, whereas pre-COVID, you're out all day and you don't come until the evening, and you don't spend as much time either with, elder parents or with children, and that's time that's gone. You can't have that back, especially if you need them or if they need you during that time. I don't want us to go back to the 9 to 5, 8 to 5 business, because that we were able to have the flexibility of work time at home, and that has been very, very fortunate. And I think it allowed us, definitely for me, allowed me to prioritize and spend my time where I need to spend it. If this work is not urgent and there's something else that needs to be done, I'm able to do that, and then I could get to this project in the evening or vice versa. Whereas a 9 to 5, you're stuck in the office, doesn't mean you're being as productive. It doesn't mean you are spending time, with the things that are priority for you. So definitely we, as a society, I don't think we need to get back to the old normal, because not all part of the old normal we're working for everyone. So that's something that I think Zoom have allowed us. But as someone who's an extrovert, and I get my energy from literally being around people, Zoom have been very draining on my energy. So as much as I appreciate and love being able to do events and programs like this, literally across the country in places where I normally wouldn't be able to if it required traveling because of distance and expense and all of that, I'm not getting the same energy level that I normally would get from an in-person meeting or an in-person gathering, where I think, like Fred, I'm able, that's where I get my energy. That's where I feel alive and happy. And Zoom have kind of drained that energy from us.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to take a online question through Carson.
We have an online participant who said that it's wonderful to hear from all 4 of our speakers about how their communities have navigated the pandemic virtually through festivities, but he was wondering more specifically, how have your communities adapted to practicing rituals of mourning, like funerals, COVID memorials, vigils, etc., and what aspects of that have been adaptable online, but also challenging or lost in the virtual setting?
I could take that. So for Muslims, I can speak for me personally. It has been difficult and hard to adjust to that. Normally in Muslim tradition, Islamic tradition, and Muslim cultures, if someone passes away, obviously there's the burial. People will go, as many people as possible will go to that burial, to be around the community, around the family, around the individual. And it has been hard with COVID, because now families unfortunately have to bury their loved ones alone almost. There's still, the community is able to do it to a degree when there isn't a lot of restrictions. But if it's a COVID case, then there's all of these limitations. So that have kind of stripped the community away from that comforting level. Same thing with the morning. Usually families are visiting each other during that time. You have everyone around you, your neighbors, people you haven't seen in ages will come to visit and support and pay their respect during that time. And of course, with everyone trying to be very cautious because of COVID, that has not been the case. We recently lost someone in our family, and it was very strange because normally we would, normally the house would be full of people or the visitation center will be full of people, and now families are doing that alone. I think what the community has been able to do is, phone calls, sending food, checking in on each other virtually, but it really have changed, and it made a lot of people go through this experience alone. And it will be really interesting to see how people have changed once we all get back to mixing and connecting with each other in person.
I mean, for me, it's been a heartache. This evening at 7:30, I have a service for someone's parent who passed away, and ordinarily I'd be at this person's house, and they would have friends at the house, bring them, food or hugs or whatever. It's been a very difficult time. Luckily I haven't had that many folks pass away in my congregation, but I've had a number of funerals. One of the funerals was really challenging. It was, in a really stormy winter day, and the family wanted to stream it live to people across the country, and there were problems with the wind, and it was really a very challenging moment, because when you're in such pain anyway, and then not to have people there with you to help, comfort you, it's very, very challenging. And what's happened for us is I think there are a number of people that we've laid to rest over the past year whose families feel like they were cheated out of something. And so I think we're going to have a number of memorial services in the coming months for these people. So family can honestly have other folks, their friends and family, join them in a celebration of this person's life, or these people's lives, because they lost out on that. And it's such an important part of life as we lay our beloved to rest. And it brings closure, and it brings you a sense, that life continues. And for some people, I think sort of this virtual or very modest funeral. I had a funeral, I guess, about a month ago where we allowed, 8 or 10 people in the building. And it just, we had this funeral service. It just seemed so, it was so empty. And it's been hard for families to know exactly what the best way to grieve is when they're not able to be around friends, family. In Jewish life, we have this tradition called Shiva, where people, it's no different, I guess. In other traditions, they do similar things. People invite people into their homes to, to share their condolences and to bring them, feelings of comfort. And certainly during this past year, that practice of Shiva has been just, at the end. It couldn't happen. And so I think people have missed that in their time of mourning, and we clergy, or at least me, it's hard to know exactly how to conduct a funeral or a service when, people aren't there. It's just, there's something that's palpably missing from it.
I've only had to officiate one funeral, and it was last weekend. Yeah, last Sunday. And it was a gentleman who was a part of our meditation group, one that I talked about earlier. And he died almost a year ago. It was not COVID related. He was in his 80s and he had a heart attack. Nonetheless, because of COVID, nothing happened. And his widow, who's a very dear friend of mine, had to go through that. When we say alone, she had us, her meditation group, but she didn't have family. And so they actually waited a year and they had it on Zoom. And the good news is that everybody from around the country was able to attend. If this had taken place, he died in Florida, they have a Florida home. If he had died in Florida and they had a funeral in Florida in normal times, you would not have had the amount of people to come, and most of it was simply sharing stories of the gentleman. And other than that, this part of the pandemic has not touched me personally, but I certainly have read about it, and I have spoken to other clergy of other faiths who had, they say the same thing as Rabbi Schadick. It's been very challenging.
And similarly for me, in my role as a pastor at Calvin, I don't really conduct funerals. Our church community has not asked me to conduct any funerals either. So I haven't had to personally deal with this, but I have heard similar stories to what have already been shared. But just the weight of mourning and the ways that we usually try to comfort each other with hugs and coming close, and that's not permitted or against the rules. And funerals end up being a place where COVID ends up being shared, and that's a really frustrating thing for some clergy. So being able to weather this time, I think post-pandemic, that's going to be one of the greater reliefs for leaders in faith traditions, is this mourning process. How do we help people do this well and then safely at the same time?
Okay, any other questions from the audience? All right. We have a question that was emailed into us. Given that Zoom and other online platforms allow you to connect with people who aren't local, have any of your communities connected with people of your faith in other parts of the country or world for worship or celebrations?
Yeah, that's a big thing. And I'm really glad that we have the technology to be able to stream in other people for being able to hear a sermon or scripture from other folks. One of the things that I've learned about recently, that I've been doing recently, is public reading of scripture on Zoom. And that means that people can attend from wherever they are. They could be walking on the sidewalk, they could be 1,000 miles away, they could be across the world and still attend with our public reading of scripture. So that has been a really wonderful aspect to this. And there's a lot of people who have been tuning into different preachers or teachers in this time as well. And that has emerged as a big value. But I think sometimes we can see that as a value of like, oh, we want to chase down the people who have the biggest following or the most, the message that agrees with us most or with our ideas the most. And sometimes that can leave our local communities behind. So I'm hopeful that we can still value our local communities in post-pandemic stuff. Even though we've seen the emergence of the value of the global way of doing things with using this technology.
I mentioned earlier the worldwide organization that I'm with that has the practically 24 hours a day of, again, meditation, yoga, exercise, scripture, etc. But one other thing that came to mind for me personally is that over the last couple of months, I was invited to help create an interfaith dialogue between Hindus and evangelical Christians. I've been involved with dialogues between Hindus and Roman Catholics. So, and my experiences there have been very successful, and I enjoyed it very much. And I'm enjoying this, and it probably would not, I guarantee it would not have happened if it wasn't for COVID, and because now Zoom is just second nature, right? We just, what do we know? We're going to do it on Zoom. And so that is, I'm very happy that that has started, and I'm sure that it will continue after COVID because none of the participants are in the same city, same state.
I think it was a novelty beginning a year ago. We could join together with other communities to hear Jewish musicians or, perhaps a Jewish comedian or some other opportunity that we could share the either the cost or join together and gather for celebration. I think that what's been happening and of late is I think people are tiring of the fact that they're watching Zoom all the time and they're looking forward to coming back in person. I will say though, I have a couple of my community members who thank us profusely because they winter in Florida and they're able to watch our service, live with us. Or I have a member that moved to the Detroit area and continues to study with us on Torah study. So it has provided a way for some people that are no longer in our exact location to remain connected to us. I think that's a very nice thing, though. I will say that people, I think at the beginning said, well, we can start listening to services in Los Angeles and in New York. And there is something I think lovely about that. But I think in the end, though, music might be more professional someplace else than we might have here, or some, speaker might be, far more intelligent and wise than I. In the end, people do like to be in a community. They're able to, I think they find some kind of gratification with being in a local place where they know each other and there's a sense of, just comfort there. You don't get that same sense of comfort, I don't believe, just by jumping around to other Zoom locations across the country where you're just a name or a face. And, it's like that old Cheers TV show. Here, everyone knows your name.
Yes, I think there's a mix of both the sentiments in our community. So on one hand, the accessibility have allowed people again to connect with Muslims from literally all over the world, all over the US. You have not just Zoom lectures and webinars and whatever, but now you have Clubhouse meetings and even Friday khutbahs being live, streamed on Clubhouse. And it also allowed the space for individuals or communities that didn't feel that sense of community in the traditional space. So I know in some of the mosques or in some of the places of worship, for example, they might not be as accessible to converts, might not be as accessible to women, might not be as accessible to young people, to African Americans. So it just depends on where you are. So those communities were able to create a real sense of community online. So you have, women scholars and women lecturers that have, I don't want to say replaced, but really allowed a safe space for those who normally wouldn't feel that community sense in the traditional mosque. But there is something to be said about having a physical place and being in a physical place with other members of your community, no matter how, if you're online with 1,000 or 2,000 people or even 100, you're just listening. You're not, you might be engaged and you might be able to connect with individuals afterward, but there's lack of, being together and knowing the details or some certain things about their personal life that connects you to them at that level. So it is a mixed package. And one of the things that we did at my work, because we do research on American Muslims, is we have a series of research that talk about creating more inclusive mosques, more inclusive spaces for the communities that I mentioned. And we were able during the pandemic to really talk about that and invite members of the Muslim community to look internally and see how they could prepare the mosque to open and be more inclusive when it reopens. So it allowed us to do some of that work when we were in the virtual sense.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question that we need to keep it short and sweet. How has COVID impacted your personal faith?
I mean, it's given me a lot more time to, well, because of some of the things that we've mentioned already. Kind of Michael mentioned the fact that we have a lot more time, the travel time is reduced. There's a lot, there are elements of time saving. And so this has allowed me to listen to scripture in longer sections, or helped me connect with my small group in more intentional ways. Kind of drill down deeper into the wells that you have created for your spiritual life. And that's something that's been very true for me and for a few other people that I know as well, that they've been able to make, drill down deeper into these wells of faith. So that's my short and sweet answer.
I mentioned before how it is in a similar fashion to you, that's just giving me more time, particularly earlier rather than now, is we are slowly going toward a bit of normalcy. But when we were really locked down, yes, longer meditation periods, longer study periods, and also opportunities to volunteer to help other people who might not have access to some of the things that we in our home have access to.
I think for me, in a general sense, it's reminded me of what's most important in life, and that's relationships that you have. I think that, we've all missed being with people close, face to face, shaking their hands, giving them a hug, wishing them well. And it's reminded me anew of what's most important in life, and that is those relationships. We can access, as everyone said, limitless opportunities for study and for learning. But what we really haven't had is those relationships close, in that face-to-face. And so it's this COVID-19 has really reminded me of what is most important, at least for me, and that is, that face-to-face deep connection with people. And I'm looking forward to hopefully, knowing that again, hopefully in a couple of months or so.
Yeah, so for me, what COVID-19 have done in terms of my faith is, allowed me more time for internal reflection and to work on the self. As I mentioned earlier, there's just so much happening. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of suffering. So just trying to find the meaning in it all. And also to reflect on how privileged and thankful I should be for what I have. The fact that I have a job that I'm able to keep and be able to, to support my family, to have a comfortable house, to have food on the table every day, to have my loved ones close by, are things to not take for granted, and to really think of the blessings. Those are blessings that other people, might not have, or they have lost. And so just really to reflect internally, be thankful even for the, we're reminded to be thankful even for the struggle, because it allows us to get closer to the Creator, to get closer to God. So a lot of time for reflection, reflecting on privilege and being thankful for what I have.
Thank you. Now I'll be handing it over to Sia and Maggie.
Hi, I'm Cedar Adele. I'm the secretary intern. Hello, I'm Maggie. I'm the communications director for CIA. So we're almost at the end here. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank the speakers once again. We have a few announcements, so please take a moment to scan the QR code and fill out our feedback survey. And if you haven't already, please make sure you fill out that attendance form.
And if there's Calvin University faculty and staff, this event qualifies as a cultural competency professional development activity. So please go ahead and register your participation in this event by visiting the Calvin website.
All right, thank you, Sita. This event was made possible by the Calvin Interfaith Alliance with the support of the Department of Diversity and Inclusion, as well as the Service Learning Center, and of course, our community here at Calvin. A big thanks to all of you, as well as Sam in the back for helping us with technology. If you're around the town, we also want to say a big thank you to our faculty mentors, Professor Dykstra Prime, Professor Howard, and Professor Van Meer. I would also like to take this opportunity to invite anyone in the audience who's interested in CIA leadership or involvement to come down after the end of the event and speak with any leaders. We're happy to answer your questions. And finally, another thank you to our panelists and audience members. We really appreciate your patience today with our technology. Thank you for attending our event, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you. Need help with that?
Okay.